My name is Claire Monroe. I'm 34. And I never thought I'd stand in my own kitchen, holding a letter from my father that didn't even start with dear. The rain tapped against the windows like a slow countdown. I sat there staring at the ivory envelope, heavy, formal, the kind of paper you use for a wedding invitation or a will. 10 years ago, he wrote "proud of you" on a sticky note after my MBA graduation. I kept that note taped to my bathroom mirror for months. I haven't seen those words since. This letter, it didn't say Claire. It didn't say daughter. It said, "Do not come to the reunion. This is not your home anymore. Do not contact us again." Thomas, see? Not Dad. Just Thomas. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just folded the letter, placed it on the counter, and stared at the space it left behind. If you've ever been erased from your own family's story, if you've ever opened an envelope and realized you were no longer invited not just to a dinner but to the life you helped build, stay with me. Because this story, it's not just about a letter. It's about what happens when the girl they erased starts writing the ending herself. Drop a comment if you've ever had to draw a line with a family, and hit subscribe because the next decision I made changed everything. Rain tapped the windows like a metronome, steady and cold. I sat at the kitchen counter, the overhead pendant light casting a perfect circle on the polished granite. My fingers brushed over the ivory envelope once more, heavy paper, formal, like something you'd use for an invitation or a will. 10 years ago, he wrote "proud of you" on a yellow sticky note after I finished my MBA. I pinned that note to my mirror for months. I haven't seen those words since. I slid my nail under the flap and opened it carefully as if it might disintegrate with too much pressure. Inside, one sheet neatly folded. Claire, do not come to the reunion. This is not your home anymore. Do not contact us again. Thomas. There was no Dad, just Thomas. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then I folded it again, slid it back into the envelope and set it on the counter like a used napkin. No rage, no tears, just confirmation. He'd warned me in 1,000 indirect ways, the family calls I was excluded from, the photos I wasn't tagged in, the wedding invites that mysteriously got lost in the mail. But this letter was clean, surgical. I got up and walked across the loft floorboards, creaking faintly under my bare feet. The room was all white walls and matte black fixtures, not cold by design but by necessity. I'd made it this way after moving back to Chicago. Clinical, uncluttered, like my life. I settled in front of my laptop. The rain had grown steadier. A low hum of thunder somewhere in the distance. I logged into the loan portal, the one connected to Monroe Auto's multimillion-dollar expansion fund. My name was on the documents. Not just a co-signer, not just a silent partner, the architect. They never really asked how the deal got approved. Just accepted that Thomas Monroe always got things done. They never knew the bank came to me first. On the dashboard, the loan structure blinked back at me, multi-tiered, high leverage, precarious if touched. I clicked through tabs, partnership authorizations, joint guarantees, revenue trigger clauses. Then I opened the access control panel. My fingers hovered for a second. Not from doubt, just habit. I clicked disable login authorization for Claire Monroe. A message popped up. Are you sure? I clicked yes. The portal blinked. Access revoked. The first brick removed. I closed the laptop. For a moment, the silence in the room felt louder than the rain. Then I reached for my phone. My thumbs hovered, then typed understood. I hit send. And then I opened the folder on my desktop labeled redemptionplan.bf. They call it a family business. I called it unpaid labor with a shared last name. Back then, the office smelled like copier, toner, and over-roasted coffee. I was 16, perched on a chair that was too tall, typing payroll entries into QuickBooks, while Dad stood in the hallway with Grant explaining how dividends worked. I already knew. I'd read the shareholder memo cover to cover while waiting for my ride home. My title, nothing. My job, everything. Claire, sort these receipts. Claire, grab waters for the board. Claire, double-check the numbers. Meanwhile, Grant got to skip meetings, blow through department budgets, then flash his grin at Dad like he'd just saved the company. He never had to clean up the mess. That was me deleting the extra zeros he added for client dinners, reconciling mileage logs that made no geographic sense. Every time I fixed one, I told myself, next time, say something. I never did. I stared at the faded folder in my hands now, an archived Monroe Auto quarterly report from 2020. I was back in my loft, present day, but my mind kept drifting. My MBA graduation had been scheduled for the same weekend as a shareholder vote. I still remember the voicemail. Sorry, honey. You know how timing works. Click. No apology. No delay. Just timing. I walked across the room and pulled another file from the box I'd hidden behind my kitchen pantry. Each folder was neatly labeled not out of obsession but survival. A record of every budget I'd touched, every credit adjustment I'd made in silence. Grant's name was stamped on every success. Mine in the margins. I slid another document from the stack of travel reimbursement. January 2022. My signature apparently authorized a $14,000 vendor liaison trip to Aspen. I never went to Aspen. I never signed that form. I zoomed in. The signature was close a passable imitation, but the R in Monroe looped the wrong way. I always curled mine under. This one swung high and proud. Grant. I leaned back, heart steady, but jaw tight. He forged my name. With that signature, they'd tied me to fraud. I flipped open my laptop and pulled up the most recent budget drafts. Jasmine had emailed them before she left the company, before they pushed her out for restructuring. Numbers didn't add up. The new project expenses doubled back on old ones. Misfiled payments. Personal charges buried in procurement categories. They thought I'd keep playing the invisible backbone. But bones can break, and when they do, they cut. I reached for my phone and dialed. Jasmine. Her voice was cautious, quiet. Claire. I took a breath. We might be past the point of caution. I didn't sign to save them. I signed because I believed in them. That was my mistake. Jasmine sat across from me at a window table in Lincoln Park, a black coffee cooling in front of her, untouched. I barely noticed the drizzle tracing lines down the glass. The folder between us carried more weight than either of us was ready to say out loud. She flipped through the loan documents silently, her finger tracing the legalese like she was reading a slow confession. I watched her eyes narrow. Page 6, Clause B2. That's where it always caught people. You co-signed, she finally said, but you didn't guarantee. There's a legal difference. I nodded, but the shame still burned. I didn't read the fine print at the time. I just trusted what Dad told me. Her look softened for half a second. That was your real mistake. I reached into my bag and pulled out the expired company card, the one that stopped working last November. No warning, no notice. They started locking me out months ago, first the financial dashboard, then the HR system. Emails got bounced back. They didn't even bother to say I was out. They just erased me. Jasmine picked up the card, turned it in her fingers like evidence in a trial. They wanted the credibility of your name, but none of the voice. They have Grant now, I said flatly. He's the new Monroe. I'm the leftover syllable. She looked back down at the papers. You know what this means, right? Tell me anyway. If you file for unilateral withdrawal before the next refinancing cycle, which starts April 1st, the bank will freeze the existing loan. Monroe Auto would need to requalify without your signature. I raised an eyebrow. They won't make it. No, they won't, she said, tone clinical. Not with their current debt to income. Not with those falsified reports. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe noise faded into a dull hum, clinking cups, quiet conversations, the hiss of steamed milk. I stared at the corner of the table, a tiny nick in the wood, and felt the weight of 10 years collapse inward. I didn't think it would feel like this, I said. Like what? Like mourning something that died a long time ago. I just never signed the death certificate. Jasmine slid a single page across the table, a draft form clean blank, sharp as a blade. She didn't smile. Ready to burn the bridge. You're acting like an outsider, Dad once said. That's when I knew I was no longer in. The words came back as I stared at the memo on my screen. Claire to be kept in CC only. Not attending, not consulted. Just copied like an afterthought. A name on the distribution list to keep the silence polite. In the sterile glow of my laptop, I clicked through the internal folders I'd archived before they cut my access. each file a breadcrumb from a time when my calendar used to fill itself with boardroom meetings and budget syncs. Not anymore. Last summer, things shifted slowly, strategically. I wasn't fired. That would have been clean. I was restructured out. The email invite stopped my input was non-essential, and no one questioned it because no one wanted to. I became a fixture, like the potted plant in reception, nice to have, not meant to speak. One day in July, I caught Grant coming out of Dad's office, his collar askew and grin smug like he'd just sealed something. I was halfway through coordinating logistics for the factory expansion, the one that hinged on getting the city's approval on zoning timelines. But that afternoon, I was told to hand it over. Let Grant lead, Thomas had said. He needs to feel ownership. Ownership. I'd been managing payroll since I was 16. Grant didn't even know the factory floor had 2 wings. Back in the present, I double-clicked a file labeled Vendor Discrepancies. It was blandly named, but I knew what I was looking for now. Jasmine had taught me what questions to ask. That's when I heard in the ping a secured message from a burner inbox I didn't recognize. Check attached. Be careful who you trust. The sender, Jay. But not Jasmine. I scanned the document. Just a list of vendor codes and wire transfers. The amounts weren't massive, a few thousand here, $4,000 there, but something was off. 3 payments to a company called Randall Supplies LLC. I'd never seen it before, and it wasn't in our original vendor network. I dug deeper. The address led to a shuttered lot in Joliet, a shell. But what stood out was the name attached to the incorporation, Brandon Chase Grant's former roommate from Northwestern. The same guy who once billed us $800 for event consulting and showed up drunk to a company picnic. The numbers added up fast. $12,000 in 3 months for vague consulting services, and signed off by Grant. I leaned back in my chair, not shocked, just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from work but from waking up to your own erasure. There was a soft knock on my office door, not the apartment, the virtual kind. A Slack notification from a Monroe Auto junior accountant still in the system. Just initials LM. A zip file attached. No message, no subject. When I opened it, I found 30 PDFs each flagged with internal comments. Mismatch, no PO attached, not an approved vendor list. I didn't reply, I couldn't, I just renamed the file. Collapseplan.zip. They sent a letter to keep me out. What they didn't know was I'd already left. The loft was bathed in pale gold. Morning sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor, illuminating the quiet like a slow exhale. I hadn't drawn the blinds. I wanted the light. I needed the contrast, something clean to frame the moment. My laptop hummed to life. I connected Jasmine on speaker, her voice crisp and steady despite the early hour. You ready? She asked, no preamble. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I've never been more. The secure portal-loaded blue progress bar inching forward with agonizing calm. My heart didn't race. It just waited. I pulled up the affidavit, the one Jasmine had prepared, signed, notarized, digitized, and encrypted 6 ways over. The file name read, Monroe Auto Withdrawal, CM, BEF. I clicked Upload. A soft chime confirmed receipt. The next screen prompted for digital identity verification. I leaned into the camera, holding my ID to match the frame. A green checkmark bloomed. Digital signature accepted, the portal read. My cursor hovered over the last button, Withdraw cosigner authorization. Jasmine's voice was low but clear. Once they get that file, it's not just official, it's irreversible. I clicked. The page refreshed. Confirmation authorization removed. Requalification required. No fireworks. No sirens. Just a quiet sentence that changed everything. A few seconds later, my inbox chimed. Subject: Monroe Auto Loan. Status update message: reassessment in progress. Estimated review: 5 to 7 business days. I closed the laptop. The room remained still, almost reverent. I wasn't expecting relief, but something inside me exhaled. Not a sigh, not a sob. Just space. They'll feel it soon, Jasmine said. Not now, not in the headlines, but in the boardroom, in the budget meetings, in the cold panicked calls from their lender. I smiled faintly. Good. We sat in silence, the call still active, neither of us in a rush to hang up. Outside, the rain from days past had vanished, leaving only clean pavement and blooming light. After a moment, I opened my digital calendar and scrolled to May. The 23rd blinked at me, a Friday. I clicked it and added a single word to the block marked family reunion dinner attend. The silence didn't break. It cracked open with 78 missed calls. My phone vibrated so long it slid halfway off the nightstand before I caught it mid-air. I blinked against this morning light, heart still calm, sleep barely disturbed. But there they were, 78. Calls, voicemails, texts, all stacked like a landslide. At first, I didn't touch them. I just sat up, let the moment settle. The hum of the heater, the faint noise of traffic below, the kind of quiet that knew what it had done. I padded barefoot to the kitchen, poured coffee without rushing. Let it brew strong. Jasmine once said power shows in pace the slower you move. When they expect you to panic, the louder your control rings. On the screen, the names blurred together. Thomas Grant, Monroe HQ. An unknown Chicago number repeated 5 times. One voicemail stood out not because of who sent it, but because it was forwarded by Jasmine. Subject line, FYI, Thomas's CPA. I tapped play. Claire, this is Edgar Langston, Thomas Monroe's accountant. I'm calling on behalf of the Monroe Auto Board. We've encountered an issue with the commercial loan structure. Our banking partner has paused all disbursements pending requalification. Please call me immediately. His voice was brittle under forced professionalism. I didn't. Instead, I opened the folder Jasmine and I had prepared weeks ago, a firewall around my credit line's trust accounts, sealed under my name, loan assets shifted before they even thought to come looking. Each line item was proof that I had already stepped back before they tried to push me. Then came the email from Grant. Subject: You seriously did this? No greeting, no punctuation, just a screenshot of the loan portal marked inactive and a string of expletives I didn't bother reading. A minute later, Patricia's messages came in clusters. Claire, we didn't know. This isn't what we meant. Please don't do anything rash. We're still family. I stared at the last one. Still family. Like the kind who invites you to serve hors d'oeuvres at your brother's engagement party because you're great with guests. The phone buzzed again. Jasmine. You seeing this? She asked, no need for prelude. They're scrambling, I said. They'll stall, try to buy time. You're the one holding the plug. I took my coffee to the window. The streets of Chicago looked exactly the same, wet, asphalt-tired delivery vans, early risers bundled in scarves. Nothing dramatic. And yet, somewhere in a boardroom or a dining room, the foundation was cracking. I replayed the voicemail from Edgar. Not out of confusion, out of satisfaction. Then I whispered to no one in particular, let them feel the weight. They never invited me to the meetings that mattered, so I made one of my own. The lounge in the West Loop didn't announce itself. No sign. Just a brass number on the door and a polished assistant who greeted me by name before offering still or sparkling. I chose neither. Jasmine and I had already run dry strategy. Didn't pair well with carbonation. Linda Whitaker arrived exactly on time, not early, not late. The kind of punctuality that told you she didn't waste energy on small talk or uncertainty. Her assistant took the outer table, a laptop already open, eyes on the screen, but ears everywhere. Linda glanced at Jasmine, then at me. So, she said, folding her hands. Why now? I slid the flash drive across the table. Because you deserve to know who's holding your investment by the throat. She didn't hesitate, plugged it into the sleek tablet she carried, and tapped through files with clinical speed. Jasmine watched in silence, surgical sharp as ever. I let Linda read. The expense records were first-line items disguised under vague vendor names, including the infamous Randall Supplies, LLC. Then came the falsified disclosures, inflated projections, misreported cash flow, and finally, a quarterly report with Linda's digital signature attached to statements she never approved. Her eyebrows didn't twitch, but her eyes sharpened with each page. Who altered these? She asked flatly. Grant, I replied. The file logs match his login credentials and timestamp. Jasmine has chain of custody receipts. Jasmine slid a folder forward. And here are the legal routes available. Clause 9 of the investor agreement gives you the right to pull capital and file suit under breach of fiduciary duty. Linda took the folder but didn't open it. She looked at me. You know, this could bring them down. I sipped my coffee black. No sugar. I'm not bringing them down, I said quietly. I just stopped holding them up. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was dense, the kind that made decisions stick. Linda turned to her assistant outside the glass wall and gave a single nod. The assistant stood and left without a word. Orders were already being executed. Jasmine reached into her case and pulled out the document we'd prepared. The affidavit's ready, she said, placing it between us. Sign when you're ready to bury it. I didn't pick up the pen just yet. The paper wasn't just paper. It was the hinge between who I was, in their story, invisible, dismissed, and who I chose to be in my own. Not angry, not vindictive, just done. My signature would be quiet, but it would echo. Same table, same room, same fireplace, but no more illusions. Firestones hadn't changed in years. The wallpaper still bore the same gold fleur-de-lis pattern. The lighting still dimmed just enough to flatter old money. I knew this table. 10-years-old legs swinging under the linen cloth I'd been told, stay quiet while the men discuss legacy. Tonight I arrived 10 minutes late, deliberately. A silent waiter opened the door and gave a knowing glance. He'd seen power before, and he recognized the air when it entered. Thomas sat at the head. Grant to his right, Patricia across from him. No one stood. No one smiled. I sat. No greeting. Just the soft thud of my folders landing on the table. 2 of them neatly labeled, perfectly aligned. Grant broke first. Let's move past this, Claire. Just revoke your filing and we can… You mean the cosigner withdrawal that destabilized your loan? I said, eyes steady. Or the affidavit to the SEC about misreported projections? He blinked. Once. Don't be dramatic. I opened the first folder and slid it toward him, a notarized confirmation of my withdrawal. The second stayed closer. Anonymous complaint documentation. Filed, time-stamped, digitally traceable. Legal weight without fingerprints. Patricia shifted her pearls, catching the low light. Honey, we're family. Let's not escalate. I leaned forward, fingers threading calmly. You escalated when you rerouted emails, when you erased records, when you let him. I nodded toward Grant, forged my name on a disclosure, and said nothing. Thomas finally spoke. You're punishing us. I almost laughed, but it came out colder. No, I just stopped pretending this was family. His jaw clenched. The room shrank around their silence. They had expected anger, maybe even tears. But not this, the unshakable neutrality of someone who no longer needed the table she was once barred from. Patricia's voice cracked. What do you want from us? I met her eyes. Not cruel, just done. Nothing. That's why I'm dangerous now. They feared noise. I gave them silence with an audience. The first alert came through while I was pouring coffee, then the second. By the time I reached the counter, the third had already popped up on my screen. Bold all caps, Monroe Auto facing financial investigation. I didn't open it right away. Let the words breathe. The article was hosted on a mid-tier investigative blog, but Mitchell's byline carried weight in the right circles, the kind that doesn't shout, just cuts clean. The headline was followed by a subhead about anonymous documents, inconsistencies in quarterly filings, and potential breaches of investor trust. The kind of language that didn't accuse. It exposed. I scrolled. Every quote they used, every phrase, some lifted almost word for word from what Jasmine and I had prepared. Not because I gave them anything. I didn't need to. Once the right dots were connected, the picture drew itself. A ping. Email. From Mitchell. Subject verified message. Everything checks out. We've got 3 independent confirmations and a banker willing to go on background. Expect the major outlets to pick this up by Monday. I clicked forward and added Jasmine's name. Subject echo. No body. I sat back. In the distance, sirens somewhere. The city went about its routines. Coffee shops, subway delays, morning joggers. But inside, Monroe Auto HQ chaos bloomed like mold behind drywall. Another ping. Jasmine. They're looking for someone to blame, but you're already out of reach. I smiled not wide, but enough to feel the corners of it. There was a power in not needing to respond, in not clarifying, in watching them twist in the silence they once weaponized against me. I refreshed the article, already trending in 2 financial subreddits, vendor partners tagged in the comments, screenshots of Monroe Auto's stock line plummeting on private exchanges. It was spreading, and I hadn't said a word. Silence properly placed isn't emptiness, it's precision. And today, it was mine. The first letter exiled me, the second one begged me back. Too late. The train station cafe smelled like burnt espresso and overripe fruit from the stand outside. I'd arrived early, not out of habit, but because Jasmine asked me to. She was already seated black blazer sharp despite the humidity, a thick white envelope on the table between us. "It's from him," she said, not needing to say who. I didn't reach for it, just watched the way her fingers tapped the corner once before breaking the seal. She unfolded the letter slowly, like it might crumble from the weight of its own contradiction. "We made mistakes. You're still our daughter." She read aloud, voice dry. "Things got out of hand. Let's sit down. We can rebuild this together." I stared past her shoulder, watching a child drop coins into a vending machine. The clatter of soda cans was louder than the apology on paper. Jasmine scanned the rest silently. "He didn't sign it as Dad," she added, flipping the last page. "Just Thomas. How poetic." Still, I didn't reach for it. I used to send him birthday cards every year. Little ones. Homemade. Stickers in the corners, lopsided handwriting. He never wrote back. Not once. Now here he was, penning elegies to a legacy he'd already set on fire. I picked up the letter without looking at it. Folded it once, then again. Slid it into the inside pocket of my bag between a protein bar and a highlighter. Jasmine didn't speak. Neither did I. Not until the platform announcement murmured our train's approach. As we stood, she glanced sideways. "Anything you want to say?" I zipped the bag shut. "They want forgiveness," I said quietly. "I just want air." We walked in silence toward the platform, a pigeon startled at our feet flapping against the rails. Just before boarding, Jasmine touched my arm. "Are you ready to build something that can't be taken from you?" The train doors opened. I stepped on without answering. Some things don't need a reply. They just need motion. "You have 5 minutes." I said it while adjusting the mic. Nate Morales, host of the podcast Undercurrent, gave a small nod, then raised his brows like someone bracing for turbulence. His studio was small. No soundproof glass or branded mugs, just foam panels, 2 hanging boom mics, and a blinking on-air sign that looked like it had seen better decades. Jasmine sat to the side, half in shadow, her legal pad unopened. The technician behind the glass gave a thumbs up. Nate leaned in. "We've cross-checked everything. Are you ready to go public?" I didn't flinch. "This is not revenge. This is a record." He pressed the button. The red light glowed. The first minute was simple. I introduced myself. Claire Monroe, former board assistant operations liaison co-signer, titles they'd buried under my brother's LinkedIn endorsements. Then Nate asked, "What made you speak now?" I looked at the mic like it was a mirror. "Because I've already left the room. There's nothing left for them to take." And then I told the truth. Not the dramatic kind with shouting or lawsuits, but the quiet clerical rot no one sees. Forged expense reports under my name. Email access stripped without consent. Loan agreements with strategic omissions. The silent CCs, the altered timestamps, the patterns of exclusion passed off as streamlining. Jasmine signaled gently when the halfway mark passed. I nodded, then pulled out the flash drive. "This," I said, "is a voice recording from a board meeting in March." My father, Thomas Monroe, didn't know the mic was still on. I tapped the keyboard. The audio was brief. 30 seconds. It didn't need more. "She never belonged here. When we file, we remove her name. Wipe the record. I don't want Claire in the family history, let alone the board minutes." Silence followed. Nate blinked. "Do you believe this is personal or institutional?" "Both," I said, "but only one of us made it public. We wrapped 5 minutes later, no tears, no anger, just clarity. The tech cut the recording. Nate removed his headphones slowly as if exiting a cathedral. Jasmine finally opened her notepad but didn't write a word. Outside the studio, traffic murmured. The air was heavier somehow. Half an hour later, my phone vibrated. The podcast episode had gone live. I didn't check the link, just stared at the push notification #1 trending, business ethics. A message from Jasmine appeared beneath it. Your silence makes them loud. This makes them irrelevant. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. For the first time, my voice wasn't asking for permission. It was writing the record. A house doesn't fall in silence. It screams down in pieces. I wasn't there when the screaming started, but I didn't need to be. The first headline dropped just after sunrise. SEC opens probe into Monroe Auto irregularities. Beneath it, a quote from an unnamed source. The silence was strategic. The trail isn't. Jasmine had warned me. They thought you were the leak, she'd said once over tea. Turns out you were the dam. By noon, the ripple became a rupture. A major investor, Whitaker Group, announced the immediate withdrawal of a $4 million commitment. No press conference, no denial. Just a quiet detachment of capital, like a limb severed without ceremony. Inside Monroe Auto's headquarters, the mood shifted from confusion to containment. I imagined the war room unfolding, hastily closed blinds, trembling fingers on keyboards, the legal team scanning contracts for loopholes that weren't there. Grant panicked first. He was always loud when threatened, yelling through stress as if volume could substitute for control. According to Jasmine's source inside, he stormed into the finance wing, demanding names, passwords, something to reverse the unraveling. He found an internal email string, 6 messages, all marked confidential. Each bore my former title, each one redacted. He must have stared at the blank spaces where my name used to be, finally realizing they weren't hiding my signature. They were hiding the fact that I no longer needed one. Then came the boardroom meltdown. Thomas stood at the head of the table, red-faced and hollow-eyed. His voice cracked as he accused the CFO, Robert Ames, of negligence, betrayal, sabotage. He didn't care which. Just needed a scapegoat. You approved those payments without confirming sources. You left us open. Robert, to his credit, didn't flinch. She didn't steal anything. She just stopped covering your tracks. The room froze. Patricia didn't speak. She hadn't for weeks. When Thomas shouted, "You're fired!" no one stood up. No one intervened. Except Patricia. She closed her binder, stood slowly, and walked out of the room without a word. Her heels echoed with finality. The door didn't slam. It sighed shut. Somewhere in the chaos, the Monroe Auto Twitter account deactivated. No statement. No apology. Just absence. By 3 p.m., media vans camped outside the HQ. A journalist asked, "Is the Monroe legacy over?" No one answered. Back in my loft, I didn't smile. There was nothing joyful in collapse. But I did allow myself a moment, brief, weightless, to breathe. Let them fight over scraps. Let them draft NDAs they can't enforce, stories they can't control. I'd written mine already. Jasmine forwarded a security camera still from inside the building. The photo was grainy, but the shape of it was enough. Thomas slumped in his chair, Grant holding a document with trembling hands and empty chairs around a collapsing empire. Then a voicemail arrived. It wasn't meant for me, but a mutual contact had forwarded it. Grant's voice ragged. She planned this. Every move. We weren't fighting a child, we were fighting her silence. He finally understood. And he was too late. Grandfather left something none of them expected. Least of all, me. The steel vault door hissed open like a breath withheld too long. Cool, recycled air and institutional lighting did nothing to soften the weight of it all. I followed Ms. Holloway's steady steps into the private safe deposit room, silent, except for the quiet shuffle of paperwork and the click of keys. "Box 314, she said, glancing over her glasses. "Your grandfather specified the access be granted to you alone effective July 1st, 2024. The date was deliberate. Not his birthday, not a holiday, but just enough time for the dust to settle after the implosion. She slid the metal drawer forward. Inside, a single envelope sat atop a slim manila folder. My initials, C.M., were inked in his familiar looping hand. The sight of it made something shift behind my ribs. Not grief, not nostalgia. More like the distant sound of a piano key struck in an empty hall, a memory of resonance. Ms. Holloway nodded, signaling she'd step out. I sat at the table and opened the envelope slowly, expecting legal jargon or vague reflections. But instead it was short, almost intimate. Claire, you saw people. When others saw numbers, legacy names, you saw people. That's what makes you okay. This isn't revenge. It's a seed. Use it. H. That was all. No signature flourish, no instructions. Just truth, tucked into a few carefully measured lines. The manila folder beneath held more than metaphor. It contained the final codicil of his will, notarized, signed, dated. Claire Monroe was named the sole trustee of the Monroe Foundation for Community Equity, the original initiative fund built before Monroe Auto ever turned its first profit. Jasmine had once joked that the old man probably didn't trust the empire either. She was right, but I hadn't expected the depth of his foresight, or his trust in me. There were no corporate shares, no buildings, no power handed down in titles. What he gave me wasn't the throne, it was the soil beneath it. Later that afternoon, I stood on the courthouse steps with the deed in hand. It felt heavier than any check or portfolio, not in weight but in consequence. This fund wasn't just untouched. It was untraceable by the ones who'd spent years erasing me. And now, it was mine to shape. A gust of wind lifted my blazer as Jasmine joined me, phone in one hand, sunglasses pushed into her curls. "You're holding something that could change real lives," she said. "Are you ready to fund something they can't touch?" I looked down at the embossed seal, then out toward the street where the world still moved indifferent and open. "Let's rebuild dignity," I said. And I meant every word. They served guilt. I brought closure. The invitation had arrived by courier, not email, thick cardstock embossed with my father's name. No RSVP, no emotion. Just a time, a place, and the quiet desperation of tradition, dressed as grace. I arrived at 6:58. The house hadn't changed. The hedges were trimmed like soldiers. The foyer still smelled like lemon polish and diluted power. The dining room lights were dimmer than I remembered, as if the bulbs too had lost their sense of duty. Patricia stood when I entered, but said nothing. Her pearl necklace sat too tight against her neck. Thomas gestured to a chair, my old place across from Grant. I sat not to belong, but to finish. Dinner had been served before I arrived. The plates were warm, untouched. The silence wore a tie. Grant cleared his throat first. "You've made your point." I sipped from the water glass. That wasn't the point. Thomas's hands, once so steady at the helm of boardrooms, now fidgeted with the edge of a napkin. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough like sandpaper against memory. "About how I handled things. About you. But we're still blood, Claire. That should mean something." I let the words pass without chasing them. My fingers reached into the envelope I'd brought, not thick, not heavy. Just one sheet of notarized truth. I slid it across the table. Patricia didn't touch it. Grant barely looked. But Thomas read the heading, the words printed too clean, too final to misinterpret. "Legal name change confirmation. Claire Monroe, Claire Whitaker. No more Monroe. No more justification for staying tethered to something that only ever pulled me under." "You erased me once," I said, voice even. "I just made it legal." No one spoke. Not even the silverware dared. I stood, adjusted my coat, and walked toward the door where I had once waited for acceptance. Jasmine's headlights blinked outside. In the reflection of the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of them, stunned, still diminished not by volume, but by absence. And then I was gone. They created a legacy of control. I built one of clarity. The new office wasn't large. It didn't need to be. Just white walls, open windows, and light enough of it to drown out any shadow left behind. A sunbeam sliced across the table where I sat, fingers resting lightly on the nameplate freshly installed that morning. Claire Whitaker, no middle initial, no echo of the surname I'd shed. The press filtered in slowly, cameras, recorders, cautious curiosity. A few recognized my face from the podcast, some from the headlines. None of them, I suspected, knew what I would say today. Jasmine stood behind me, arms folded. Her presence was the only armor I needed now. She leaned in just before I stepped up. You could have rebuilt Monroe Auto with this. I don't want to inherit, I said, smoothing the creases in my jacket. I want to interrupt. The podium mic clicked on with the tiniest hiss, and I spoke without clearing my throat. Thank you all for coming. Today we're launching the Unnamed Initiative, a fund not just for startups, but for rebuilding dignity in people who were once told they didn't belong. A few eyebrows rose. Good. This initiative is for those pushed out of boardrooms, living rooms, dinner tables for not being the right kind of legacy. It's for anyone who walked away not to escape, but to create something that couldn't be taken. Behind me on the wall hung a simple frame with a handwritten quote, my grandfather's final gift. Blood doesn't make you ethical. Choice does. The cameras zoomed in. Mira stood off to the side holding a folder labeled Proposal 01. She was barely 22. Brave, brilliant, estranged from her own family after coming out. And now, our first recipient. I nodded to her. She smiled back. After the press cleared, Jasmine stayed behind her laptop, balanced on one knee. You know, she said, glancing at the quiet inbox. I thought revenge would taste better, but this is air, I replied. A chime pinged. New email. The subject line glowed on screen. A girl like you saved my life. I didn't open it. Not yet. I turned instead toward the window where the afternoon light stretched long and clean across the city and thought, this isn't an ending. It's an interruption. And it's just beginning. They say silence is weakness. I used to believe that. I used to think that if you didn't defend yourself out loud, if you didn't scream the truth in a room full of liars, you'd be forgotten, outvoted, overwritten. But silence, I learned, can be a scalpel, a strategy, a slow unraveling of the mask they were too proud to remove themselves. For years, I played their version of loyalty, quiet obedience, wrapped in family dinners and boardroom deference. I handled their finances, fixed their messes, smiled through betrayals dressed as restructuring. I stayed in the background because I thought that was love, because I believed in their potential even when they erased mine. And then one day, they handed me a letter not with warmth or even honesty, but with finality. You're not invited. You're not one of us. I read it once, didn't flinch, and folded it without a sound. Because by then, I already knew I wasn't trying to belong anymore. What followed wasn't revenge. It was arithmetic. Cause and consequence. A careful undoing of every rope they tied around my name, each one cut with facts, documentation, and patience. I didn't torch the house. I just stopped being the one quietly holding the beams in place. When the calls came, 78 of them to be exact, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My absence spoke louder than their desperate voicemails, and when they finally sat across from me, at that table, offering empty apologies and transactional guilt, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even flinch. I gave them clarity. I showed them what family means when it's stripped of power and performance. I told them the truth, and I made it legally binding. By the time the headlines hit and the investors fled, I had already moved on. They were still looking for a scapegoat in a system they built on erasure. But I was no longer traceable in their hierarchy. I had chosen something they could never offer: integrity. The final blow didn't come from a courtroom. It came from a legacy. A sealed envelope from someone who had once watched quietly, too. My grandfather didn't leave me the company. He left me something better, the original purpose. A fund meant for community long buried under greed and tax shelters. He saw what they refused to, what they trained themselves not to see. And I rebuilt from that. I built something with no boardroom backdoor, no nepotism clause, no illusion of blood over truth. I built an initiative for those like me, those cast aside not because they failed, but because they didn't conform. And for the first time in my life, I stood at the front not to prove myself, but to invite others forward. I don't use my old name anymore. I didn't need it to begin with. Names don't define power. Clarity does. I've been asked if I forgive them. My answer is simple. I released them. That's heavier than any punishment they'll ever understand. And if they ever tell the story, they'll have to lie because the truth no longer belongs to them. Justice in stories like hers doesn't arrive on cue. It waits for timing, for proof, for one final breath of courage. But when it arrives, it doesn't whisper. It shifts the room. The ones who abuse power often mistake silence for submission. What they forget is that silence can also be the sound of someone sharpening the tools of truth. And sometimes, the most powerful act of revenge is walking away without needing to be seen. Like the quiet strike of a pen on paper, the final verdict echoes long after the noise is gone. And no wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If you've made it this far, chances are you've had your own version of a letter like mine. Maybe it wasn't written on ivory paper. Maybe it wasn't signed by someone who used to call you family. But maybe it still felt just as cold, just as final. Maybe you've been left off the guest list. Maybe you've been told you're too much or not enough. Maybe you've spent years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for you to sit at comfortably. I used to believe that keeping the peace meant keeping quiet, that if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, stayed agreeable enough, eventually they'd see my worth. But the truth is, some people only value you when you're silent, when you're convenient, when you don't ask for more. Walking away wasn't easy. Setting boundaries wasn't easy. Saying enough wasn't easy, but necessary. Absolutely, I didn't share this story to get sympathy, or revenge, or closure from people who never gave it willingly. I shared it for anyone sitting in their own version of that kitchen counter moment, holding proof in their hands that they've been written out. I want you to know your worth isn't up for debate. You're allowed to reclaim your space. You're allowed to build something better, something no one else can take credit for or tear down. Maybe for you, it won't look like legal filings or business contracts. Maybe it's just choosing peace over old patterns. Maybe it's finally saying no and meaning it. Maybe it's moving on without making a scene because your dignity doesn't require volume. And if this story spoke to something you've been carrying, if it helped you feel a little less alone, please leave a comment below. Share your story. Your voice matters here. You never know who's scrolling and needs to hear that they're not the only one. And if you want more stories about healing boundaries and finding your voice after silence, hit the like button, subscribe, stick around. Because the next story might be the reminder that you've been waiting for. Thank you for listening, and more importantly, thank you for choosing yourself. My name is Theora Quinn, and this is the story of how I got banned from a family party inside the house I legally owned. For years, I stayed quiet. I let them rewrite me out of birthdays, out of holidays, out of every group photo on the wall. They said I walked away, that I didn't care, that I wasn't part of this family anymore. But the truth? I was 17, pregnant, and pushed out of my own home. They held baby showers, bridal brunches, welcome parties, all under the roof my father promised would always be mine. And when I found out they'd thrown a party for my brother's baby and made it very clear I wasn't welcome, I didn't show up angry. I showed up with something stronger, a lawyer, a will, and 5 years of silence turned into proof. If you've ever been the forgotten daughter, the erased sibling, the one left off every invitation, stick around. Because this is how I went from being invisible to being the only name that mattered, on the deed to the house where they told me I didn't belong. Lena had warned me days ago. The more they push you away, the more you need to be there, she said, arms crossed as she leaned against the kitchen counter, watching me scroll through Ethan's Facebook feed like it was a crime scene. This morning, the sky in Seattle was washed in pale gray, with streaks of light struggling through. My apartment was quiet, too quiet for a Saturday, the kind of silence that lets regret sneak in through the cracks. I sipped coffee by the window, watching a couple walk their golden retriever past the red brick buildings across the street. It should have been a normal day, but it wasn't. Today, Ethan and Rachel were hosting their welcome baby party. The photos had started appearing already, silver balloons spelling Noah, catered food in pastel blue trays, and a cake shaped like a teddy bear. Everyone was there, except me. No message from Ethan, no call from Rachel, not even a passive-aggressive email from Mom. Nothing. I refreshed my inbox again. Still nothing. It shouldn't sting anymore, but it did. Especially because that house, the one in the background of every smiling photo, was where I spent 17 years sweeping the front yard every morning before school. The hydrangeas were probably blooming now, and the new owners of the memories I built were clinking glasses in the living room while I stared at my phone like a fool. I opened the cabinet above the fridge and pulled out the gift I'd prepared anyway. A handmade quilt I spent weeks stitching in the evenings, each square embroidered with symbols from our childhood. A tiny house, a paper airplane, a tree from the park we used to sneak off to. Even now, I couldn't stop myself from giving. Lena walked into the room, her hoodie sleeves pushed up, eyes alert. She had that quiet fire in her, the kind I used to have before years of pretending to be unbothered hollowed it out of me. "Did they ever send anything?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Number. But I'm still mailing the gift. It's what decent people do." Lena didn't say anything at first. She just sat at the edge of the table watching me fold the quilt back into the box. I could feel her stare, heavy with judgment and something else. Pity, maybe. Then she spoke. "We're not sending gifts." I looked up. "Excuse me?" "We're leaving." I blinked. "Where are we going?" Lena zipped up her jacket, looked me square in the